Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review a movie called Tenet, which, honestly, to me, is a fairly overly complicated film. Reasonably, it's overly complicated just because, reasonably, it's basically just a movie about effects. It feels like the movie was kind of done in the editing bay afterwards. It's kind of one of those kinds of films where it just relies on effects and everything like that. It doesn't rely much on actual, seemingly real legitimate story because the story doesn't really quite feel all that important to me. Reasonably, when going into this film, a lot of people might have easily liked it. To me, it just kind of after a while just became like there doesn't really feel like a story to me that mattered. And so that's where I kind of had a big disconnect. And honestly, I think this movie for me was probably something that I probably didn't like now, but maybe later on will like more so later. So this is a movie that I don't need now, but maybe I'll deserve later in Batman terms. So going into this movie, just started to just like I wanted this movie to just so badly to just be like on in background noise and not really honestly and truly pay attention to it because like once I figured out that this was like an effects movie, I was like, I don't care for this film. Um, like recently, it was just it kind of took me out of the whole thing. So going into this movie, again, I will have a different opinion about this movie. I know for me, I've ultimately emphatically said that I'm a person that loves visuals, but this was not it for me as far as the visual department. Like for me, I was waiting for a more story that I could understand, but never did. So because a lot of this movie felt too all over the place meaning that really there like in 30 minutes there was like six different like setting transitions that we had to go into in the first 30 minutes of the film seemingly probably less than that, but like there was a lot of like transitions going from like scene to scene to scene to scene to scene to scene to I'm like good god. Like, man, they're really getting a lot of money out of this movie by having to like shoot so many freaking locations. I'm like, good God, this must have been exhausting for um, everybody having to like set up all these things for like 5 minutes of footage of this movie. And like that happened quite frequently within this film. So, yeah, really, for me, I just thought everybody was so emphatically interested about this movie because Christopher Nolan slapped his name on it. I really think that's about it. Like, I really thought that that's probably the real reason why anybody was honestly and truly interested. This movie has to do with time travel. Woohoo. It's just so basically, everybody was like, "Hey, that Avengers thing, that worked." So, time travel, right? Yeah, it doesn't work all the time, but let's try it. So, yeah, this movie is about time travel, and really, once you kind of get to the real like hook of this movie, I was like, "That's it? Like, that's what this is?" Yeah, no. Um, camera angles and ooh wah, camera angles, ooh wow. Movie done in the editing bay. All right, this is great. So ultimately, this movie really does break down to me in a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers shot. So in one shot, this kind of explains this entire movie. So you have it to where when a Mighty Morphin Power Ranger like monster grows into 100-foot skyscraper monster, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm towering over you," and so you have it in a very camera angle distance. You have this like big big arm coming down on this like smaller person. He's like, "Oh no, don't crush me," and like the arm is like huge in the big part of the screen and like crushing this person, like, "I'm crushing you, I'm crushing you, I'm crushing you, ooh yeah, I'm crushing you." And like that's what it feels like to me, was like the Power Rangers are standing like 100 foot away from this foot that's going to crush them, and so it gives that camera illusion that these Power Rangers are getting crushed, but they're really not, because they're 1,000 yards away from this actual foot, before they flip away from the foot and don't get actually crushed. Yeah, so that's kind of how this entire movie breaks down to me, as just effects and camera angles, and then just a story that I just have to tolerate for 2 hours and 24 minutes, because ultimately I'm just waiting for when I'm going to get a story that I'm actually going to invest in, but that never happens. So let's break down this movie in very spoiler-like terms. I'm just going to kind of really rush through this whole entire review, because I just didn't like this movie, and ultimately maybe this movie was too smart for me or whatever, but I just didn't like the way it was overall. Just like there was too much time taken up on really just camera stuff, and I'm just like, or editing stuff, or this and that, and I was just kind of like, okay, so everything else just has to be random. Like, this is a real like director editing bays movie, and that's about it. So it's just like, I don't get why this movie was going to be a really cool movie. I don't quite get it. So yeah, it is what it is. So, and if anything, this movie kind of reminded me of like the the Angelina Jolie movie, Wanted. It kind of reminded me of that. I was like, this movie kind of feels like the movie Wanted, but then it kind of goes into more in depth than just like what the real true concept of Wanted is. It kind of gets in further in depth than just that. It kind of feels like the Angelina Jolie movie, if that Wanted movie had a sequel and went more in depth about just like what they would do in that movie, then it would be this film. But yeah, so let's go into spoilers of this movie, because ultimately the review is probably going to be all over the place, because this movie felt all over the place. Within the first 30 minutes, I was just like, good God, how many scenes did they have to jump through? Like, how many, like, set pieces? Like, man, crazy. All of this movie is, like, overwhelmingly just too much. So ultimately for me, I just couldn't get into it, because it was just like, it was all just, like, hitting me too quickly. I was like, holy crap, like, there's a lot going on in this film, and I can't understand any of it, and I'm just exhausted. This movie made me exhausted, because it's just jumping everywhere, and I'm like, good God, this film. So, yeah. Let's get into spoilers about this film, because ultimately, yeah, overall, it's just, like, this movie just wasn't the movie I needed, but eventually in time will be the movie I deserve. So, spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So, my opinion about this movie, based on what probably others will feel like, I love this movie and I hated that you didn't like this movie. Like, sorry. It's just, I don't care for a movie that is, like, the only thing is is just visuals, and the visuals aren't all that like mind-blowingly great anyways. And it's just like, yeah, it's not that great to do what they did in this film. It's not all that ooh ah going on in this movie. Like, yeah, the scenes may be very complicated, but so anyways, so yeah. Going into this film, spoiler time now. So we go into this film and there is a terrorist attack that happens into this concert. And so we have some guy in some van saying, "Hey, wake up the American." The American gets waked up. He slaps on some like badges that replica the cops because they're not actually legitimately cops. They're some kind of secret agency that is kind of melding into what the cops are doing. So ultimately, while this terrorist attack is going on in this concert, evidently the cops are sending in like gases to snuff out uh, not only the terrorists but the concert goers. So we go in here, and eventually the our main character that was the American um, is going into rescue this, I think, this like politic figure, and he tells him some secret code about Twilight, and the person answers in kind with like the darkest before the dawn or something like that, and like it's their secret code to tell one another, but this Twilight code keeps happening all the time. It's like their encryption thing. So this guy collects this, I guess, this political figure, and so they kind of go through this concert area um, trying to get this guy out of there. This guy, our main character, has a gas mask on, and it seems like gas masks and medical oxygen tank like thing masks are used quite frequently in this movie because there's a reason for that. So we have this guy who's trying to get this guy out of here and eventually gets shot by some bullet. The main character does. This bullet bizarrely goes from this bullet hole, from out of this bullet hole back into this guy's gun, and but then eventually, like they eventually get to the point to where because ultimately they figure out that this main character guy is not who he says he is because they rip off his badge and like, hey, you're not who like we're with. So eventually it gets to the point where the guy gets captured and he gets tortured, and then they're wanting information out of him, and they grab one of his buddies that he was with, and they say that he had that this guy had a suicide capsule. Well, the main character guy doesn't want to give up any information, so he quickly grabs for the suicide capsule, takes it, and eventually wakes up in this like hospital bed on this boat somewhere, and he is talking to his boss saying like, hey, yeah, like that suicide capsule wasn't really a suicide capsule, but you've been in a coma for a while. So ultimately you find out the suicide capsule was a test to ultimately figure out this guy's loyalty to this group, that he wouldn't give up any information, that he would just end himself, and this and that. So this guy eventually like transitions into these different kind of outfits, and eventually transitions into going to this facility where he talks to this doctor. And here's where the hook of the movie comes. Yay! So this doctor basically has him fire these bullets. And these bullets are going into some rock thing, but then coming out of the rock thing to go back into this guy's bullet. So these bullets are doing things in reverse. So basically, we now have the concept of this movie, which is time traveling bullets. But it gets way more complicated than just time traveling bullets, because eventually it gets more than just time traveling bullets. It becomes time traveling people. And so a bulk of this movie has to be shot in reverse at some points, because people are reverse fighting. They're reverse, uh, like, getting out of things. Cars are flipping in reverse at some points because there's a whole car fighting scene of people like that are reverse people. Um, it gets to the point where they have to put on some oxygen mask while they're in this while them themselves are time traveling, doing some mission, because ultimately you can't breathe in reverse time, because it won't allow you to. So you got to wear an oxygen mask or a gas mask on the entire time you're doing all these things in reverse time. So yeah, so that's the biggest hook of this entire movie. And I'm like, oh my god! So this rest of this movie is all going to be like camera shots and just So we find out that eventually our main character teams up with Robert Pattinson. Robert Pattinson is very much a guy that goes into a facility and is looking for all the exits, looking for how that they can kind of figure out some plan to get into somewhere. Because at first they Robert Pattinson breaks into this house and finds this girl, and he talks to her and gets information about her, and they find out that their villain has stuff from the future being sent to this one villainish like guy. Future knowledge being sent to this guy to the past, like money and stuff like that, but seem like more than that at some certain times and this and that. So we eventually have it to where this guy has to go through this facility. This facility that does not have uh, like uh, if there's a fire that starts into the building, they don't have a sprinkler system. What happens is if there was ever a actual uh, fire going on into this building, like they would just put this uh, they would just put this like gas through there to snuff out the flames and this and that, and they would have like a 10-second warning for anybody to like, hey, like there's gonna be gases unleashed and this and that. So in the beginning of this movie, we have these people that are breaking into this facility to get some item. I don't know what. I guess it's just this kind of like, because they're trying to prevent this like new nuclear war, which is bullet time traveling things, and so they're breaking into this place, and while they're breaking into it, there's people that are going against him, and these people that are going against him are going against him in reverse time. So these guys in gas masks are attacking our main character and Robert Pattinson in reverse time. So eventually that whole thing resolves, and then eventually they have to somehow get in with their villain of this story. And eventually, the main character guy goes to the woman that he's involved with and finds out that the woman is being blackmailed and can't see her son and this and that ever again and blah, 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 blah. This woman eventually wants to break it off with the main villain, but the main villain won't break it off with her because ultimately, if she won't be with him, then she won't be with anybody else. So ultimately, this guy wants to come and try to find a way to be in with this villain. So eventually, he tries to tie himself to this woman to tie himself to this man. So eventually, they go on like sailing with one another or scuba diving or something like that, and eventually they make friends. And then eventually, the villain ends up finding out about our main character, and then, like reasonably, it's just like everything blows up. So it gets to the point to where they have to do this car chase scene, and all these like cars are doing stuff in reverse like time, and it ultimately is to the point to where the main character has to give the main villain this like briefcase like thing, because he wants this stuff. At this point I'm like, what is even going on in this movie? I don't understand it anymore. Like, I don't get what any of this stuff is anymore at this point. So a lot of this stuff is just going to be all over the place because it kind of has to be, because this movie is all over the place. So eventually it gets to the point to where there eventually ends up being this all-out, like, war thing going on. Evidently, we have our main character eventually talking to the guy who had played Quicksilver in Age of Ultron, and he was also in Kick-Ass, and he was also in Godzilla. The Bryan Cranston Godzilla, not the one with the girl from Stranger Things. Uh, he ultimately goes to this military-esque-like guy, and the military-esque-like guy is breaking down this war that they're going to have with these people. And I don't understand why, because I don't understand this movie anymore. And there is some other team that is doing this war in reverse time or time traveling time. And so it's like, hey, like, we won't know what they're doing, but if anything, they're going to do this meeting in an hour from now, but they're already here, and this and that. So it's just like, okay, whatever you want to do in this movie now. So, and ultimately, we can't tell you what the reverse time team is doing, because it'll conflict with what we're trying to do. Because everything has to conflict with everything that everyone is doing, and they can't tell anybody what anybody is doing, because ultimately they break it down as the grandfather conflict or the grandpa conflict, where ultimately if you go back in time to kill your grandfather, then you will not exist. So you can't go back to kill your grandfather, because then you won't, there's no way you can do that. Because you won't be able to exist then. So anyways, so we get to the aspect of this war, and there's a bunch of reverse camera shots, and a bunch of people are killing a bunch of people. And I'm like, woohoo! Just battle it out in reverse or whatever time. Whatever's going on in this movie, sure. Anyways, but before that, or whenever this part happens in this movie, we eventually have to have some plane, like, bizarrely crash into some building. And also we have to have, like, Robert Pattinson and our main character kind kind of eventually finding out the answer of who those gas masked men were fighting Robert Pattinson and the main character in the early portion of this film in this one facility, because it was them. It was Robert Pattinson and the main character were fighting themselves in a later portion of this movie. We find that out. So ultimately, they go into this movie at a different time in the past, I guess, to in reverse time to fight themselves. And supposedly Robert Pattinson couldn't tell the main character that he was going to fight himself, because like you can't tell somebody that they're going to have to put a bullet to the brain of themselves. You can't tell them that. So or otherwise they wouldn't have fought as hard, or they wouldn't have they would have been prepared for anything. You can't tell anybody what they're doing, because you don't want to prepare them for anything. You want to kind of leave them in ignorant bliss, so they won't think about they won't think too hard what they're already going to doing. They'll just do it. So they end up like having to go through this building and do all this stuff, and eventually go what they're going to go into. And I don't understand why anybody's doing what they're doing anymore. I am just like, I don't understand this film. There's too much going on. It's visually, it is what it is, and like, I'm not even gonna ask anybody to help me like figure out and decipher this movie anymore, because ultimately there's a lot. I just like, it's all just a visual movie, and like that's all it really comes and breaks down to, of just being a visual movie and nothing else but that. And so that's where I was just kind of like, okay, so I really could watch this entire movie on mute and it won't matter, because it's just visual, visual, visual. And that's all that matters. So eventually we get to an aspect after all this war and all this rigmarole going on. We get the woman who is detaching some things on this boat. And we're wondering why. Like, there's one kind of like, she's like taking apart these things on this boat. She's opening up one of the sides of the part of the boat for reasons I don't quite understand. And then she's going to brush this stuff that evidently broke. She's going to clean some of this stuff on this boat. The blonde-haired woman on this boat with the guy who's ultimately the villain of the story. So she goes and starts talking to the villain, and she ultimately eventually just starts putting like suntan lotion on his back, but then she just stops and she's like, you know what, I can't really just do this anymore. Like, if anything, like I can't do this. So she throws out a gun and shoots him in the stomach, and she drags his body to the side of this boat and pushes him off the boat. This guy like flies through a portion of the boat, gets hit by the side of the boat, and then falls over. And I'm like, wow, like how many freaking, like, what happened to, like, was this stuntman? Did the stuntman actually hit the side of the boat and that's why they had to shoot this that way? Or like exactly did they shoot this part? But so the villain ends up getting killed, and I'm like, why didn't you just kill this person earlier? Could have solved a lot of things. But eventually, yeah, everybody gets like to where like everybody gets their like send-offs, and we find out that Robert Pattinson and our main character ultimately won this bizarrish war that makes no sense, and then basically Robert Pattinson breaks down, like, of course, like the main character asks him before, like, hey, why didn't you tell me that I was going to go in there fighting myself? He's like, well, I couldn't have told you. And then eventually, after they fight this big war at the end of this, uh like the main character like goes to him and is kind of like, hey, like, how is it that we like it doesn't really feel like this is going to be like the end of like all of this. And like technically Robert Pattinson says it's like, well, technically it's like the beginning of all of this, because ultimately 2 years from now you recruit me for this mission. And it's like, what? Like, because ultimately Robert Pattinson's character is from the evidently the main character, like 2 years from now, creates all of this stuff to create this whole entire event, this whole entire movie from uh from the days of future past and this and that. And so Robert Pattinson says like, hey, like I'll meet you in the beginning. Yeah, so our main character orchestrates all this without even knowing that he orchestrates all this. And yeah, it's a lot of this movie is so like past and present and future and this and that, and all of it is just all over the goddamn place. And like that's just how the movie eventually just ends. I don't want to take much more time talking about it because this movie is like too complicated for me to just go into all the way through and just look at it and just be like visual, visual, visual. But other than that, it's like not much other than that, sadly. So I'm gonna get out of here because ultimately this review was probably too confusing for me to even break down and explain it. And for me, like this movie was just so over the place, and ultimately it was just yeah. A lot of people would probably explain this movie way better than I can. A lot of people probably wouldn't try to explain this at all. And for me, it was even for me to probably explain it, probably left a lot of people more confused than anything else. Like, what happens in this movie? Because that's what this kind of movie is like. It's just kind of like, what? What's going on? Huh? What's going on in this review? What's going on? Things? I'm so confused. If you're confused by me explaining this movie is freaking confusing anyways. So it's just like, and it's just a visual camera thing. So that's all it is. So I'm gonna get out of here because it's just a visual thing. That's nothing more than that. So I'm gonna call it a wrap here. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.